Hello and welcome to our podcast on the use of contractions in academic writing. Let's go ahead and dive right in here. So again, we need to go back to our rhetorical triangle and think about why we are writing the piece that we're writing, what are we writing about, and to whom are we writing. And so our goal is to make sure that all three corners of our triangle align, therefore clear communication can be achieved. In the fact that our message is appropriate to the audience, we have appropriate tone, we are addressing all of the needs of that triangle evenly and appropriately. And so as we are talking about contractions, we always have to be thinking about this triangle and what we are trying to achieve with our writing. Oftentimes, contractions are just fine to use. We use them when we speak, we use them in informal writing, and that's totally okay. But when we want to up the ante a little bit, add a little bit of formality, try to be a little bit more clear, a little bit more persuasive, perhaps add some rhythm and style to our writing, then we want to use no contractions. So first off, what are contractions? Just in case we've forgotten, this is when we use an apostrophe to show that two words have been joined and that some letters have been removed. The apostrophe serves that purpose to show us that we have taken out a letter or letters in the forming of this new joined word. For example, if we join can and not, we can create can't. If we combine does and not, we get doesn't, he and is as he's, and will and not become won't. Now the question always comes up around the word ain't, which is technically a contraction of the words am and not. So instead of saying, I am not going to do something, you might say, I ain't going to do something. It is a word that exists in our language, but it is exceptionally low on that formality scale. And so if we are contemplating our use of the rhetorical triangle, what we're writing about and to whom we are writing, we might want to make sure that our level of formality is matching the audience that we are intending to reach. So if you're intending to reach somebody from Duck Dynasty, go ahead and use ain't all you want. But if you're planning on writing to the college board or to the admissions office of your favorite university, you probably should not use ain't in that rhetorical situation. The big reason we're talking about contractions right now is the tie to style. Contractions are informal, and so it promotes a very laid-back style. So, which is totally fine if you're talking with your friends, if you're making an email, if you're writing just some sort of quick thank you note to somebody. A contraction is totally fine because the overall style is informal. But as we move up the ladder towards more formal pieces, we want to make our language match our purpose and the rhetorical situation. So if we go back to that rhetorical triangle and our argument that more formality calls for less or no contractions, then we need to be aware of what we are creating. So what kind of situation are we writing? Is this a speech? Is this a letter? Are we being inaugurated as president? If so, then we probably should not use contractions. The higher the formality, the less contractions we should be using. And one reason we want to think about this in terms of formality is because of the effects that no contractions have on our writing. This will lengthen the cadence of the piece, and therefore it will slow the pace. So if we are trying to make a point, if we are speaking in a situation where people don't have our speech in front of us and therefore they need to hear every word more clearly, therefore we must be more slow in our pronunciation and our cadence, not having contractions would be a good thing. In addition, it seems to increase the majesty of a piece. It seems to just make it sound more important when we don't use contractions. And then finally, it improves the sonority of what a piece sounds like. It just sounds more paced. It sounds more important when we don't use contractions. So a lot of the examples I'll be showing you come from speeches. And so that makes sense why somebody would want to slow the pace, because they have to allow people to actually hear them since they're not reading along. But consider when we are writing those formal essays for class, college entrance things, or maybe even our speech at the graduation ceremony. Consider using no contractions in order to slow the pace, emphasize certain parts of our writing. And so here are some examples from various texts. I'd like to read them to you so you can hear the pace, you can hear the sonority of the piece when we do not use contractions. But at some point, go ahead and stop the podcast and read it to yourself again using contractions where these have been underlined, showing that we are not using contractions. And what does it feel like? How is the pacing? How is the importance of this piece changed when we use contractions versus when these authors have not? So here we go. Here's the first one. That is the way in which we women of England are doing. Human life for us is sacred, but we say if any life is to be sacrificed, it shall be ours. We will not do it ourselves, but we will put the enemy in the position where they will have to choose between giving us freedom or giving us death. And so you notice will not stays as will not rather than won't, and we will stays we will rather than we'll. Here's another one. A borrowed book is like a guest in the house. It must be treated with punctiliousness, with a certain considerate formality. You must see that it sustains no damage. It must not suffer while under your roof. You cannot leave it carelessly. You cannot mark it. You cannot turn down the pages. You cannot use it familiarly. And then someday, although this is seldom done, you really ought to return it. And so here, not using contractions and writing out the full word of cannot over and over again adds nice repetition, nice emphasis, nice parallel structure, and it just sounds more emphatic. So if we change that to can't, you can't leave it carelessly, you can't mark it, you can't turn down, that would sound more informal. It would rush the pace. So if you want to slow the pace and draw attention, don't use contractions. Here's an example from Nelson Mandela, and at the time we made this podcast, he had just passed away after 95 years. But here's an example of his writing. During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. Again, all those opportunities where he could have used contractions, he chose to write them out as two words. And it slows the cadence, it draws more attention to it, and it just sounds more formal, which makes sense since at the time when he was giving the speech, he was the president of South Africa. He's in a formal position, making a formal speech. It just sounds more formal. So no contractions equals more formality. Here's one from Abraham Lincoln. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. And again, it just sounds different. Now we're engaged in a great civil war. We're met on a great battlefield. It would just sound sloppy. It would sound informal. It would sound rushed, and probably would not have the staying power of the Gettysburg Address that this has right here. Here's one from Winston Churchill. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. Again, instead of saying, we'll go on to the end, we'll fight in France, it just sounds strange. It sounds like you're talking about the wheel of a car rather than we will, or in this case, we shall, which is very emphatic, it is very cadenced, it is very proper, and it draws attention to it, and is very inspirational, where we hear the leader of England talking about this important event in World War II, saying, we shall do this. We shall, over and over again, instilling confidence, instilling pride, instilling power in the British people. And he does that through his rhetorical choice to not use contractions. So that's about it for now in terms of contractions in writing. The point, again, is as we consider our rhetorical triangle, we have to consider why are we writing this piece, to whom are we writing it, and what are we hoping to gain. And so the more formal our piece is, the more we want to draw attention to certain things, the less we should use contractions. Again, contractions are very informal style. They tend to be a little bit sloppy. They tend to quicken the pace. And so if we want to do the opposite, which means raise the formality, slow down the pace, and draw attention to words, then we should not be using contractions in our academic essays or in the speeches we may be writing. As always, if you have any questions, go ahead and bring those into class. We'll get those answered. Otherwise, we will see you soon. Thanks a lot.